You have just crossed the threshold into an active behavioral forensics lab. But, if you are looking around for yellow police tape, you are not going to find it.
Right. There are no chalk outlines on the floor here.
Exactly. There is no shattered glass, no physical fingerprints to dust, no DNA swab to take. The crime scene we are investigating today exists entirely inside the human nervous system. And the weapon used to commit the crime, well, it was someone's personality.
It really functions as the perfect crime. I mean, the perpetrator never flees the scene. They stay right there in the living room or the boardroom or, the family group chat.
Yeah, hiding in plain sight.
Completely. And through this series of invisible psychological transactions, they usually manage to convince everyone watching, including the target themselves, that the person bleeding out is actually the one holding the knife.
Which is just terrifying. So by the time this deep dive is over, you, the person listening to this right now, you are going to recognize psychological manipulation patterns that most people never see, even after decades of exposure to them.
We are pulling from a massive stack of intelligence today.
We really are. We have clinical research on trauma bonding, behavioral forensics, legal strategies pulled directly from high-conflict divorces, and even macro-level computational disinformation studies. Yeah. Our mission here is to decode the secret operating manual of the covert narcissist.
The hidden psychological predator who hides, brilliantly I might add, behind the mask of vulnerability.
And that right there shatters the fundamental bias most of us carry about danger, doesn't it? Like if you ask someone to describe a predator, their mind instantly goes to overt aggression.
Right, because we are biologically conditioned to look for bared teeth. We look for the raised voice, the clenched fist, the obvious tyrant pounding their fist on the table.
But the most dangerous human predators do not operate that way at all.
No, because overt aggression is inefficient. It triggers your immune response immediately. A covert predator, on the other hand, comes wrapped in vulnerability. They present as the ultimate victim.
And because they present as a victim, your natural defense mechanisms just never deploy.
Exactly. You drop your shield and you lean in to help.
You lean in, you offer your resources, and the stakes of that single unconscious movement are just monumental. If you are listening to this and thinking, we're just talking about a bad breakup or a toxic boss or an annoying sister-in-law, you really need to recalibrate your understanding of the threat.
This is not just bad behavior. We are talking about the systematic, deliberate hijacking of your reality.
Yes. This is an invisible operating system that gets installed into your psyche, completely rewiring your perception of yourself and the world around you.
And it rewires your actual physical physiology, too. I mean, we are looking at the physiological toll of a hijacked reality today. How this invisible operating system literally alters the target's central nervous system.
Trapping them in a state of chronic biological threat.
Right. But before a predator can launch a smear campaign, before they can isolate you from your friends or bankrupt you in family court, they have to wire you to their system first.
They have to find the open port, and they absolutely do not pick their targets at random, do they?
Not at all. It is a highly selective screening process. The observable behavior, the charming first date, the fast-moving workplace friendship, that is just the surface layer.
Just the bait.
Exactly. Underneath that, at the level of unconscious psychological drivers, the narcissist is running a highly sophisticated environmental scan. They're looking for specific neurobiological priming.
They are hunting for a nervous system that has already been conditioned to accommodate their pathology.
Which brings us to the internal architecture of the target. Have you ever looked into Dr. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory? Because it completely changes how we understand this targeting process.
Oh, absolutely. Porges coined the term neuroception, right?
Yes, neuroception. It refers to our nervous system's unconscious biological scanning for safety versus danger. And it happens completely below conscious thought.
So imagine your nervous system as like a Homeland Security threat level color system. For a person with a secure, healthy upbringing, calm communication registers as green, which means safe. Chaos registers as red, which means danger.
But if you grew up in a chaotic environment or a family system where love was highly conditional, your threat assessment system was calibrated completely differently.
Right. Your nervous system learned early on that safe actually means predictably unpredictable.
And so the system treats peace as a malfunction. It feels suspicious to them.
Exactly. If it is quiet, the other shoe is about to drop. Chaos feels familiar, and familiarity registers to the nervous system as safety.
Let's apply that biological blueprint to a behavioral forensics breakdown just to ground it. Think about a hypothetical early-stage interaction.
Okay, set the scene.
So you're sitting at a coffee shop on a third date, or maybe having a drink with a new colleague who has taken you under their wing. They look down at their cup, they let out this heavy sigh, and they deliver a line like this. You know, you're the only one who really understands how my mind works. Everyone else in my life has eventually abandoned me. My exes, my old business partners, they just couldn't handle my depth.
Oh, wow. I mean, if we freeze that frame and put that single sentence under a microscope, the cognitive dissonance is just staggering.
It really is. What is spoken aloud is, you are the only one who understands me.
But the hidden transaction, that invisible psychological contract being slid across the table, is something entirely different.
The hidden transaction is a compliance test. What they're actually communicating is, I am assessing your willingness to sacrifice your own boundaries to soothe my historical wounds.
They are handing you a script.
Yes, the character you have been assigned is the rescuer. And the question is, will you read the lines?
And the emotional response they're specifically trying to trigger there is not empathy, is it?
No, it is the fawn response.
Right, the fawn response. This is a concept popularized by trauma expert Pete Walker. Most people know fight, flight, or freeze, but fawning is the fourth trauma response.
It is the unconscious, compulsive need to appease, accommodate, and soothe a potential threat just to avoid conflict.
It is essentially a psychological hostage negotiation where you trade your own reality for temporary peace. You drop your boundaries to keep the other person emotionally regulated because your nervous system genuinely believes that if they are dysregulated, you are in danger.
And here is the real tragedy of that screening process. The highly driven, successful, deeply empathetic person hears that line, everyone else has abandoned me, and their fawn response activates, but it masquerades as compassion.
They think, I am different. I am loyal. I will be the one who doesn't abandon you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They do not realize they have just signed a predatory contract that guarantees their own psychological depletion.
I do struggle with viewing this purely as a calculated conscious test by the narcissist, though. If we look at the target, are we concluding that the victim's own empathy is the weapon being used against them?
That is the big question.
They aren't merely being fooled by a clever con artist, but their own nervous system is actively seeking out and latching on to a familiar chaos.
Wait. That is the counterintuitive truth of coercive control right there. It is a lock and key mechanism. For someone with this specific neurobiological priming, a steady, reliable, emotionally regulated partner actually feels foreign.
It registers as boring?
Boring, or even anxiety-inducing, because there is no friction to solve. The nervous system doesn't recognize it as home.
But the person who runs hot and cold.
Oh, the person who idealizes you one moment, texting you constantly, and then mysteriously pulls away the next. That intermittent reinforcement triggers an intense, addictive dopamine cycle.
It mimics the survival dynamics of their childhood.
Yes, it feels intensely magnetically like home.
So the abuse didn't break the victim. The abuse exploited a break that was already there.
A structural vulnerability installed in the foundation long before the narcissist ever even walked onto the property.
That completely shifts the paradigm of how we view the people who fall into these traps. If you are listening to this deep dive and you've blamed yourself for, being stupid or ignoring the red flags, you are fundamentally misunderstanding your own biology.
You weren't weak. Your survival mechanisms were hacked. Your empathy was weaponized against you.
But if the victim's own nervous system is working against them, actively interpreting chaos as connection, how does the illusion ever shatter? What is the catalyst that finally breaks the spell and turns the vulnerable victim into the target of a psychological war?
The spell breaks the exact moment the target stops reading from the assigned script, the moment they attempt to establish autonomy.
And in the clinical world, this triggers what is known as a narcissistic injury.
Let's explore that catalyst, because we are moving from the setup phase into the hidden motivation and the ultimate power objective. What actually happens inside the psyche of a covert narcissist when the target finally says no?
Well, if you are dealing with a healthy, integrated personality, a boundary, saying something like, I need some space this weekend, or I'm not comfortable with how you spoke to me in that meeting, that is processed as normal human friction.
It might sting a little, but it is a negotiation.
Right. But to a narcissist, that same boundary is not a negotiation. It is processed as a direct, violent, existential attack on their superiority. It is psychological annihilation.
Because beneath the grandiosity, beneath the carefully constructed mask of the misunderstood genius or the tireless martyr, there is a massive hollow void.
It is a deep, unprocessable reservoir of toxic shame.
And the narcissist lacks the internal software to process that shame. Their entire psychological architecture is just a defense mechanism built to keep that shame permanently repressed.
So the moment you set a boundary or the moment you decide to leave the relationship or the company, you threaten to expose that buried shame.
And to survive this psychological emergency, they must instantly project that shame outward onto you. You can no longer be the beloved rescuer. To justify their sudden hatred, you must be transformed into a malicious persecutor.
This is where we see the weaponization of reality. Dr. Jennifer Fried coined a brilliant acronym to describe this exact defense mechanism, DARVAIR.
Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender.
Exactly. It is the operating system for projecting shame and destabilizing a target's reality. Let's run a layered case study to see how this invisible transaction works in real time.
Perfect.
Imagine a confrontation. The victim has just discovered a secret credit card with, say, thousands of dollars of hidden debt. The victim approaches the covert narcissist, holding the statement, and says, "You hurt me when you lied about our finances. We agreed to be transparent with each other."
Okay, watch the sequential deployment of DARVO here. First, the denial phase. The narcissist doesn't look guilty. They look you dead in the eye with absolute chilling conviction and say, "That never happened. I never hid anything from you. You are imagining things. You clearly don't understand how rolling balances work."
This is the gaslighting phase.
Yes. The objective is not to win the argument about the math. The objective is to immediately destabilize the target's trust in their own cognitive grip on reality.
And the working memory of the victim is suddenly flooded. They are looking at the paper, then looking at the person, trying to reconcile the absolute certainty in the narcissist's voice with the physical evidence in their hand.
And before the victim can even process the denial, the narcissist pivots to the attack.
The pivot is lightning fast. They say, "You're always so paranoid and controlling. You've been suffocating me for years, looking over my shoulder, interrogating me like I'm a criminal."
Notice the projection there. The narcissist is the one who engaged in deceptive covert behavior, but they instantly attack the target's character.
Forcing the victim to defend their fundamental decency.
And then comes the absolute masterpiece of the psychological operation, the reversal of victim and offender.
The narcissist's voice might crack here. They might even, produce tears. They say, "I have to hide things because you are impossible to live with. If you weren't so endlessly demanding and critical of everything I do, I wouldn't be forced to protect myself. I am the one suffering in this relationship."
The sheer cognitive whiplash of that transaction is breathtaking.
It really is. The victim walked into that room holding empirical evidence of financial betrayal. But by the end of a 3-minute conversation, the issue of the secret credit card has completely vanished from the room.
The victim is now apologizing for being controlling and desperately trying to comfort the narcissist for their supposed suffering.
In behavioral research, this is categorized as outrage management. The narcissist intentionally plays the victim to create a massive emotional distraction.
Figure and ground are completely reversed. The issue is no longer the hidden debt. The issue is now your abusive, controlling reaction to the debt.
And the target is left completely disoriented. They are spinning in a state of cognitive dissonance, literally doubting their own sanity.
But if this happens in a private living room, it is just interpersonal abuse. The truly terrifying escalation occurs when the narcissist decides to take this DARVO strategy out of the private sphere and deploy it in the public square.
That is the moment the dynamic shifts from coercive control to a public execution. That is the smear campaign.
And we really have to dismantle a massive cultural misconception here. A smear campaign is not a spontaneous emotional reaction to a messy breakup.
Right. It is not two people mutually bad-mouthing each other because they are hurt.
No. It is a premeditated, highly calculated information operation.
It is a forensic strike. It begins weeks, sometimes months, before the separation is even finalized.
And this is the hidden behavioral clue that almost every victim misses until it is entirely too late.
While the victim is sitting in couples therapy, agonizing over communication strategies and thinking they're working on the relationship,
the covert narcissist has already accepted that the relationship is over. They are using that time to build a forensic narrative case against the victim to mutual friends, family members, and colleagues.
they're laying the groundwork for a preemptive strike.
If we look at the clinical sources and the behavioral data, a sophisticated smear campaign relies on 3 distinct tactical pillars.
Pillar number 1 is outright fabrication. And these are not random lies. They are tailored, surgical lies designed to strike at the core identity of the target.
Right. If the target is a finance professional whose career relies on integrity, The narcissist seeds rumors of embezzlement or erratic financial decisions.
If the target prides themselves on being a devoted, attentive mother, the narcissist whispers to the PTA about substance abuse or dangerous neglect.
It is an assassination of the specific pillar the victim leans on most for their self-worth.
But pillar number 2 is arguably more insidious because it is so much harder to disprove. Selective truth.
This is where the narcissist takes real, verifiable facts, but strips them of all context to manufacture a completely false narrative.
For example, let's say the target experienced a natural, devastating period of grief after losing a parent. They were deeply depressed, they struggled to get out of bed, perhaps they were prescribed medication.
A very human experience.
Exactly. But the narcissist takes that true human fact and frames it to mutual friends with a tone of heavy, burdened concern. She has a history of dangerous psychological instability. I've been covering for her and keeping the kids safe for years, but the medication isn't working anymore.
That is chilling. Because the mutual friends know the target was grieving. They remember the depression.
The lie contains a kernel of truth, which acts as a Trojan horse, bypassing the friend's critical thinking. It makes the lie incredibly sticky.
And then we have pillar 3, reaction baiting. This is where the covert narcissist privately, relentlessly provokes the victim.
They send cruel, taunting text messages. They deliberately violate court orders. They withhold critical funds.
They push and push for weeks until the victim's nervous system finally snaps and they send an angry, unhinged, all-caps text message in response.
And what does the narcissist do with that text message?
They screenshot it. They carefully crop out the 3 weeks of severe provocation that preceded it, and they present that single, isolated reaction to the public as empirical proof.
Look at this message she just sent me. Look how irrational and explosive she is. I am terrified for my safety.
It is brilliant in its malice. It is weaponized reactivity. Now take these 3 pillars and transplant them into a corporate environment.
The corporate playbook is a fascinating subgenre of workplace forensics. A workplace smear campaign orchestrated by a covert narcissist typically runs in 4 distinct phases.
Let's say you are a mid-level director and a new, highly charismatic colleague joins your team. Phase 1 is the setup.
They mirror your values. They stay late with you, order takeout, vent about the inefficient CEO. They earn your trust and map your vulnerabilities.
They learn exactly which projects you are insecure about.
Then comes phase 2. Momentum.
They start seeding fake concern to upper management. It never sounds like a complaint. It sounds like loyalty to the company.
Right. They say something like, I love working with John. He is so creative, but I'm just a little worried he's dropping the ball on the Q3 deliverables. Have you noticed he's been a bit scattered lately? I've been trying to pick up his slack without saying anything.
Phase 3 is the payoff. They wait for a minor, inevitable human error, a missed email, a delayed report, and they weaponize it as absolute, undeniable proof of your incompetence.
Which triggers phase 4, the aftermath. Management, primed by months of subtle conditioning, launches an HR witch hunt.
Sham investigations are conducted not to find the truth, but to justify a termination, protecting the company from liability while completely destroying the target's professional reputation.
But this raises a massive question about institutional intelligence. Why do highly paid, experienced executives fall for this? Why does an entire HR department buy into a narrative constructed by one manipulative employee, often ignoring a decade of stellar performance reviews from the target?
Because the covert narcissist is a master of exploiting systemic and cultural biases. They use highly subjective, loaded terminology, words like difficult, moody, abrasive, or not a team player.
If the target is a highly driven, assertive woman, these words exploit deeply ingrained sexist biases within the corporate structure.
If she sets a firm boundary, she is branded as difficult. If she expresses passion for a project, she's branded as erratic or emotional.
The lie is incredibly convincing because it perfectly aligns with pre-existing, unconscious prejudices held by the management team. The narcissist doesn't have to invent the bias, they just have to trigger it.
It is a systemic failure of perception. But if we move away from the boardroom, we hit a much more painful, unresolved question. In a corporate setting, HR might not know the victim's true character. But what about the victim's closest friends?
What about their own siblings or parents?
Right. If the lies are so entirely fabricated, why do the people who have known the victim for 30 years suddenly believe the narcissist?
Because a smear campaign cannot operate in a vacuum.
Right.
A psychological predator cannot destroy a reputation alone. They require foot soldiers, They require proxies.
And this takes us into the sociology of what the literature refers to as the flying monkeys.
It is a term borrowed directly from the Wizard of Oz. The winged creatures who do the Wicked Witch's bidding, swooping in to terrorize the protagonist so the witch can keep her own hands completely clean.
The narcissist outsources the abuse.
And the deployment of these proxies creates what clinicians call the secondary wound, which, in my experience, is often far more traumatizing and permanently damaging than the primary abuse from the narcissist.
We really need to categorize these enablers because they are not a monolith. The taxonomy of flying monkeys breaks down into 3 distinct profiles. The first profile is the manipulated rescuer.
These are the people who absolutely break the victim's heart. They are usually highly empathetic, good-hearted people who have been completely conned into believing the narcissist's victim narrative.
They spread the lies under the guise of deep concern.
They are the friend who calls you up and says, I just want to mediate this. He's in so much pain. He's crying every day. Can't you just sit down and talk to him? You're being a little harsh.
They genuinely believe they are helping. They are doing the predator's work while feeling morally superior.
Then you have the second profile, the complicit enabler. This person is fully aware that the narcissist is toxic. They have seen the abuse firsthand, but they are absolutely terrified of becoming the next target.
Their survival strategy is appeasement. So they pressure the victim to comply just to keep the peace. They say things like, you know how she gets, just apologize so this goes away. Don't rock the boat. You're just making it worse for the rest of us.
They are actively sacrificing the victim to appease the predator, hoping the crocodile eats them last.
And then the third profile, the malicious co-conspirator. These individuals often share the narcissist's toxic traits. They thrive on drama. They actively participate in tearing the target down because the proximity to the destruction makes them feel powerful and relevant.
Let's examine how this proxy warfare operates within family systems, particularly regarding the dynamic of the family scapegoat. When a narcissistic parent targets an adult child, usually the child who is finally going to therapy and trying to establish healthy boundaries, they deploy the flying monkeys within the immediate family unit.
And they use a very specific cultural weapon to ensure compliance.
The mother myth. This is a societal bias that needs to be completely dismantled. Our culture operates on the implicit, unquestioned assumption that all mothers are unconditionally loving, naturally nurturing, and endlessly self-sacrificing.
And the narcissistic mother exploits this cultural bias masterfully. She will call the aunts, the uncles, the siblings, weeping hysterically.
She will list basic, legally required provisions as if they were extraordinary acts of martyrdom. I gave her food, I put a roof over her head, I bought her school clothes, and this is how she repays me, by cutting me off and calling me toxic.
She paints the adult child, who is simply trying to survive decades of psychological enmeshment and abuse, as an unstable, ungrateful ingrate.
And because of the mother myth, the extended family instantly sides with the weeping mother. The idea that a mother could actively seek to destroy her own child is too psychologically terrifying for the family to process, so they choose the easier narrative.
The child must be crazy.
The physiological trauma of this realization is staggering. We have to look at the long-term consequences of this systemic betrayal. What actually happens in the human brain when you realize your entire support network, your family, your lifelong friends has turned against you based on a fabricated narrative.
The secondary wound is not just emotional, it is biological. The social safety net is biologically required for human survival. When it is severed, the brain interprets it as a literal death threat.
Exactly. The brain's fear center, the amygdala, goes into chronic, unceasing overdrive. You are thrust into a constant state of threat physiology. Your cortisol levels spike and stay there.
And psychologically, this leads to structural dissociation. To understand this, I look through the lens of internal family systems therapy, or IFS.
When the trauma is this profound, the victim's psyche fractures into different parts to survive the unbearable reality.
You develop the performing part. This is the manager part of you that puts on a suit, goes to work, and tries to hold the facade of a normal life together.
You have the hypervigilant part, which is constantly scanning emails, parsing text messages, waiting for the next betrayal.
And buried deep down, carrying the agony, you have the exile.
The terrifying, vulnerable part of the psyche that starts to internalize the smear campaign. The exile starts to whisper, if everyone I love thinks I'm the problem, maybe they are right. Maybe I am the crazy one. Maybe I deserve this.
It is the ultimate manifestation of gaslighting. When 10 people in your community tell you that you are the problem, the human brain inevitably begins to believe it. It is a systematic, engineered dismantling of your internal compass.
So imagine the isolation. Your personal network is compromised, your professional network is poisoned, your own family might be actively participating in the smear. Where does a victim go when they have no one left?
They turn to the ultimate authority. They turn to the legal system, seeking protection and objective justice.
Which brings us to our next major escalation point. What happens when the institutions designed to protect us become the abuser?
If you think the courtroom is a sanctuary of objective truth and rational justice, a covert narcissist is about to teach you a deeply painful lesson in institutional predation. Let's analyze the high-conflict divorce and the family court system.
The fundamental flaw is that family court was built on the assumption that it is mediating disputes between two reasonable, emotionally integrated people who want a fair settlement and want to move on with their lives.
The system is completely, catastrophically unequipped to handle a psychological predator.
Because the narcissist doesn't want a fair settlement. The conflict is not a byproduct of the divorce, the conflict is the objective.
They want total, humiliating victory. They want the complete financial and emotional depletion of the target. They weaponize the legal system itself, turning the courtroom into a taxpayer-funded theater for their coercive control.
We see highly specific, repetitive tactical patterns. Procedural flooding is a classic strategy. They file endless, pointless motions.
They constantly fire and change their own lawyers to stall proceedings. They refuse to provide basic, legally mandated financial disclosures, forcing the victim to spend thousands of dollars filing motions to compel.
They will deliberately drag a standard 6-month process out into 3 to 5 years of agonizing litigation, simply to bankrupt the victim through legal fees.
And the most tragic element is how they weaponize the children. False abuse allegations are rampant. Parental alienation.
In the UK, they manipulate the CAFCAS reports, the Section 7 welfare reports, by putting on a masterclass in impression management.
They present to the social workers as the deeply concerned, calm, protective parent, while subtly portraying the victim as erratic, hysterical, and emotionally unstable.
And here is a behavioral clue that often surprises people, but we see it constantly in profiling these cases. The covert narcissist will routinely ignore or actively sabotage the advice of their own lawyer.
Wait, why? If the goal is to win, why ignore the legal expert?
Because their grandiosity dictates that they are the smartest person in the room, including the judge and their own counsel. They do not view their lawyer as a legal advisor. They view their lawyer as a blunt instrument to bludgeon their ex-spouse.
And here is the most devastating systemic failure of the entire process. The court system consistently rewards the narcissist's calm performance of reasonableness while actively punishing the victim's genuine trauma symptoms.
It is a devastating dynamic to watch unfold. The narcissist stands before the judge in a tailored suit, speaking in a measured, calm, deeply reasonable voice. Your Honor, I am just so exhausted by this conflict. I only want what is best for the children. I am very concerned about my ex's mental health. As you can see, they are struggling to cope.
Meanwhile, the victim is sitting at the other table, shaking, hypervigilant, disorganized, exhausted from years of gaslighting and sleep deprivation, perhaps crying in frustration because another lie was just told.
And the judge, who likely has zero clinical training in the nuances of coercive control or trauma bonding, looks at the two people in front of them and applies a basic, flawed heuristic.
The judge thinks, well, he seems very rational and composed, and she seems incredibly unstable and hostile. Maybe he has a point.
The trauma symptom is misread as the underlying pathology. It is institutional Darvo. The legal system itself reverses the victim and the offender, doing the narcissist's work for them.
But we cannot stop at the family court level.
Yeah.
If we are truly decoding this invisible operating system, we have to look at how it scales.
Because these exact same tactics, fabrication, Darvo, leveraging proxies, exploiting systemic biases, they do not just happen in family court or HR departments, they happen on the global stage.
And before we dive into this macro-level analysis, we must note explicitly, we're observing these historical and political events strictly as clinical case studies in behavioral manipulation and psychological warfare.
Yes, absolutely. We are taking no political sides. We are merely reporting the behavioral data from the sources to demonstrate how this operating system scales from the living room to the geopolitical theater.
Exactly. We are bridging interpersonal domestic abuse to state-level computational propaganda. The mechanics are identical. Only the budget and the reach change.
Let's look at historical precedents first. In 1856, John C. Fremont faced a massive coordinated smear campaign exploiting religious prejudices. Political operatives fabricated the narrative that he was secretly a Catholic, which was a massive vulnerability at the time to terrify Protestant voters.
It was a targeted assassination of his identity.
In the 1960s, General Motors didn't just disagree with Ralph Nader's car safety advocacy. They hired private investigators to wiretap him, and actually hired prostitutes in an attempt to entrap him in a compromising situation to completely discredit his character.
In 1988, Gary Hart's presidential campaign was destroyed by the deliberate weaponization of tabloid sensationalism.
These are classic smear campaigns, but today the technology has evolved, leading to what intelligence agencies call the FIMI framework: foreign information, manipulation, and interference.
But what is truly disturbing is how this framework is being applied domestically by governments against their own citizens.
Look at the data coming out of Peru regarding Dina Boluarte's administration in 2025. Facing a massive crisis of legitimacy and widespread protests, the administration allegedly utilized endogenous manipulation, data distortion.
But look at the psychological tactic there. They hijacked the victimhood narrative. The state claimed they were the ones being unfairly attacked by subversive elements, demonizing their opponents to mask profound institutional failure.
It is the exact same Darvu tactic. Deny the failure, attack the protesters, reverse the victim, an offender just applied to an entire nation.
It is the covert narcissist's playbook, fully funded by state budgets. And modern technology has made it terrifyingly efficient. We have disturbing case examples of industrial-scale smear campaigns that should terrify anyone active on the internet.
Look at the use of bot networks. During the high-profile Amber Heard defamation case, independent intelligence reports showed massive, coordinated, inauthentic bot networks designed specifically to manipulate public opinion, drive harassment, and engineer consensus of hatred.
We are seeing the weaponization of deepfakes, too. AI-generated robocalls, like the fake Biden calls in New Hampshire, or synthetic endorsements designed to create false realities.
And we see highly targeted gender disinformation campaigns engineered to destroy female activists, journalists, and politicians on an industrial scale. They use deep-seated misogynistic tropes to create a digital mob, an army of millions of algorithmic flying monkeys designed to exhaust, discredit, and silence dissent.
Which leaves us staring into a massive, terrifying, unresolved question. If the predator controls the narrative from the living room to the corporate boardroom to the family courtroom and even manipulates global social media algorithms, is the victim completely powerless?
Are you just destined to be crushed by this machinery?
No, you are not powerless. But surviving and outmaneuvering this type of predator requires a complete, radical paradigm shift.
You cannot use conventional defense mechanisms against an unconventional psychological weapon. If you fight them using normal rules of engagement, you will lose.
Which brings us to the blueprint for empowerment: the forensic defense.
We are moving from the anatomy of the attack to the architecture of survival. First up is a concept that sounds simple, but goes against every biological instinct you have: radical disengagement and behavioral defense.
If the narcissist's ultimate goal is to elicit an emotional reaction to prove to the world that you are crazy, your primary defense is to become a psychological black hole.
In profiling community, this is known as the gray rock method. You become utterly uninteresting, completely unresponsive, and emotionally blank.
You give them absolutely zero data to feed on. No anger, no tears, no explanations, no desperate pleas for understanding, no defensive arguments.
This leads to a massive counterintuitive truth that victims struggle with immensely. When you are being actively smeared, when lies about your character are being spread to people you love, your every biological instinct screams at you to defend yourself.
You want to go on social media, post the text receipts, write a long, impassioned defense, and expose the narcissist to the world.
Do not do it.
Going public is the absolute worst strategic move you can make. It acts as high-octane fuel for the smear campaign because it gives the narcissist the exact emotional reaction they need to validate their lies.
They will screenshot your frantic, lengthy defensive post, send it to all the flying monkeys, and say, "See? Look how obsessed and unhinged they are. They are harassing me online now."
You cannot win a public relations war against someone who is entirely unconstrained by the truth. They will always outlie you.
So if you can't defend yourself publicly, what do? You pivot to meticulous documentation.
You shift the narrative entirely away from emotional pleas and clinical labels, and you focus exclusively on objective behavioral data.
Do not walk into a courtroom or an HR meeting and say, "My ex is a covert narcissist and they are gaslighting me." The judge or the HR director will instantly roll their eyes, assuming you are just another bitter person using pop psychology buzzwords.
Exactly the opposite. You walk into court and you say, "According to the verified timestamp logs on our family wizard, My ex-spouse missed 4 consecutive custody exchanges, sent 12 hostile messages within a 24-hour period violating the communication order, and failed to disclose 3 separate bank accounts, which I have documented and verified here in Exhibit A.
You use secure, time-stamped cloud systems, Evernote, CaseGuard, dedicated legal communication apps. You stop trying to convince people of your emotional truth, and you become a cold, calculating archivist of your own reality.
You rely on data. Data does not have a trauma response.
But we have to address the physical reality of the target. Cognitive understanding of these tactics, and even gathering a binder full of data isn't enough to heal, is it? Because while you are gathering data, your body is still trapped in that chronic threat physiology.
No, cognitive behavioral therapy alone often fails here. We have to talk about somatic healing. Dr. Peter Levine's pioneering work on somatic experiencing is crucial to surviving this.
The body stores unprocessed trauma as frozen survival energy. You can know intellectually that you are finally safe, the divorce is final, you have a new job, but your nervous system is still bracing for the next attack.
Healing requires working physically with the body to discharge that frozen energy. It requires teaching the nervous system that the war is actually over.
It is about rebuilding the internal compass that the narcissist systematically dismantled.
And a massive part of rebuilding that compass involves reclaiming your anger, not as an explosive, destructive, abusive force, but as a pure biological signal.
Anger is a healthy, protective mechanism. It is the body's alarm bell that says a boundary was just violated.
For a victim who was meticulously taught by the narcissist that their anger was abusive or crazy, learning to feel anger again without shame is a radical, life-saving act of reclamation.
And in terms of protecting your physical livelihood in the real world, there is the realm of online reputation management, or ORM, and legal offense. Sometimes gray rock is not enough.
If the smear campaign is actively destroying your business, threatening your employment, or permanently defaming your character online, you cannot just ignore it.
That is when you escalate, but you do it strategically and coldly. You do not rant on Facebook. You hire a defamation attorney. You send formal cease and desist letters.
You partner with elite reputation management firms like Blue Ocean Global Technology for SEO suppression and DMCA takedowns to digitally scrub the defamatory content from search engines.
You fight them in the shadows with immense legal and technical leverage, not in the public square with emotion. You make the cost of smearing you unacceptably high.
So if we pull all these threads together, from the microexpressions on a first date to geopolitical disinformation campaigns, what is the grand unified theory here?
Let's finalize the synthesis. We have decoded the invisible operating manual. The covert narcissist's entire power structure, from the intermittent reinforcement that wires your nervous system to them, to the DARVO that shatters your reality, to the smear campaign that isolates you, and the systemic abuse that drains your resources. It relies entirely on one single vulnerability.
It relies on the victim remaining engaged in a rigged game.
The game is rigged. But the moment you stop defending your character to someone committed to misunderstanding you, the moment you step completely off the emotional battlefield and rely on radical disengagement, objective documentation, and strategic leverage, the narcissist's weapon loses all of its ammunition.
They're left holding an empty gun.
But there is one final, lingering revelation we need to explore before we close this case file. We talked at the very beginning about why you were targeted, how your nervous system was primed by a childhood that taught you love was transactional, that chaos felt like home.
The neurobiological template for familiar chaos, the structural vulnerability we discussed.
Right. But the roots of this vulnerability might go significantly deeper than your own childhood experiences. If we look at the groundbreaking research into epigenetics by Dr. Rachel Yehuda at Mount Sinai, we find something scientifically astonishing.
Trauma actually alters gene expression. Specifically, it alters the DNA methylation process and affects the HPA axis, which regulates our stress response.
The trauma experienced by your parents or even your grandparents fleeing a war, surviving domestic violence, enduring systemic oppression can leave a physical, chemical mark on your DNA.
This alters how your nervous system responds to stress, danger, and attachment before you were even born.
What a fascinating and simultaneously terrifying realization. The vulnerability to this specific kind of psychological predator, that deeply ingrained fawn response, that unconscious cellular belief that you must sacrifice your own reality to secure human connection, it might not have started with you.
It might be an intergenerational legacy, a ghost in your DNA, echoing from a trauma that occurred long before you took your first breath.
Think about how completely that reframes the entire experience of the victim. It entirely removes the heavy burden of shame, that persistent, agonizing question of, why was I so stupid? Why did I fall for this?
Because you didn't just fall for it, you were biologically, historically, and epigenetically primed for it. Your nervous system was playing sheet music that was written generations ago.
The question isn't just how you survive the covert narcissist sitting across from you in the courtroom or the boardroom today. The question is far more profound.
The question is, now that you recognize this invisible operating system that has perhaps hunted your family line for generations,
Uh-huh.
will you be the one to finally break the ancestral chain?
You have stepped into the behavioral forensics lab today. You have seen the invisible fingerprints left on your own nervous system. You now hold the secret operating manual in your hands.
The crime scene is no longer a mystery, and the illusion has been shattered.
The yellow tape is down. It is time to walk out of the lab and build a reality they can never, ever touch.